Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. When we stood on the precipice of change, that of generations, and that of among the most beloved Spider-Man universes in recent memory, Insomniac, players, and Miles Morales alike had to look deep and ask themselves a question. How will I know when I'm Spider-Man? The next questions were only for us. What does it mean to be neither a sequel, expansion, DLC, or remaster? How much should it change? And how much should that cost? Time to get some answers. And we begin where the game does. The introduction is a flawless interweaving of narrative, spectacle, and tutorialization. It's 10 minutes of Insomniac purely at their best. But that's not why we're here. Miles makes a mistake. He was too bull-headed, and now the bull is headed for trouble. How many lives did he put at stake? It doesn't matter. It can't. For as Peter counsels, Spider-Man must never give in. But he will fall. That's what Rhino contextualizes. The fight was too long, too much happened at once, and Peter gets his one bad day. We believe it, but there's one last trick up his sleeve. A hero. Peter begs Miles to leave, but an absolute, unyielding sacrifice plants his feet against certain death. The oath means nothing. Spider-Man is an archetypal moral hero, and his stories are an elaborate excuse for him to prove that in the most meaningful ways. It is in this sacrifice that we see the first spark of Spider-Man. Might just be one of the greatest introductions of the console generation. If you look at that from one perspective, that doesn't mean much. But now Insomniac have to hold the ball for the next 8 hours. Can they? Perspective. Perhaps that is the most appealing thing of all about Spider-Man. It's not just the fantasy of flight. It's the ultimate indulgence of the child within, to take the symbols of the system and turn them into a playground. Web swinging is a form of escape. For the user, a form of play, but in many ways too, a symbolic rebellion. No different from skateboarding. Amazing, isn't it? Swinging up here with these breathtaking new animations. It's hard to question whether or not you're playing as Spider-Man, but that makes room for a better one, and perhaps, for Insomniac, the hardest of them all. Who is Miles Morales? Miles' writers find themselves chained to a seesaw, where too much resemblance to Peter makes him feel more like a shadow, and too little doesn't make him feel like Spider-Man at all. Someone make sure IGN is okay after hearing that. We've come to accept this balancing act, but why does it exist to begin with? Well, surely it'd be immensely difficult to have a similar social status in the same city, with the same powers and fit the same subset of the same heroic archetype and come out a meaningfully different character all the same. So, now you see why it's a tough question. Who is Miles Morales? We're going to answer that question in both its forms. First physically, or literally if you like, and then symbolically. Who is Miles as a person, and what does he represent? Let's begin. One of the most vital ways Miles differentiates himself from Peter is Peter, in that he isn't here.
See you in a few weeks, Spider-Man. New York's only Spider-Man.
From what I've seen on YouTube, he's doing time in spider jail for tax evasion. But the point is, heroes inspire us. So, for the sake of believability, they also inspire the people of their city. Batman is a symbol. For us, he's a symbol of willpower. But for Gotham, he is quite literally a symbol, there, of fear. Spider-Man, by contrast, is a symbol of morality, and true to his relatability, he is precisely that for his fictional New York too, including all the people in it, like Miles Morales. After the same scars of tragedy, the same trick of fate, now months of learning complete and a war emerging between Roxxon and the underground resistance, Miles' motivation is primarily to live up to the idol of Spider-Man, to what he symbolically means. I use the Spider-Man to become the Spider-Man. It works, but even in this, especially in this, Miles cannot escape Peter's shadow. And what differentiates him from here? They say I can relate to Miles. Really? Why, Miles more clearly represents newer generations and different cultures. Both great. And since I'm in a good mood, I'll let Miles into the drip patrol for his Timberlands, but these are aesthetic qualities. Can you relate to being so thoroughly pure with no internal struggle or deep temptations? Can you relate to being a model student, a model friend, a model child, an excellent musician, an award-winning scientist? At 17, Insomniac hardly know what they're doing with the character's virtues. I'm somehow supposed to believe that Miles and Finn made an award-winning energy converter, and then accept it's surprising that Jimmy fucking Neutron here knew the definition of the word mutable.
It'd be nice to find something mutable. Mutable? You mean change his shape? Look at you, breaking out the fancy vocab.
Which might just be the only weak line of dialogue in the entire game. Any Spider-Man must fit a moral heroic archetype. If you want them to be a different type of hero altogether, then give them a different name. Spider-Man is a type of hero, and Peter manages that with a charisma and a laundry list of flaws to grapple with and overcome. Temptation, arrogance, awkwardness. He's the everyman hero. Is Miles? Miles is a poster child, not a rebel, nerd, or underdog. The climax of his physical characterization and differentiation comes at the close of Act 1, where Miles first dons his classic costume. It's the same heroic montage routine as Into the Spider-Verse, with much the same focus.
Whenever you say Spider-Man, you always mean the other one. You're Spider-Man. You can fix this. Your way.
Powerful words, but I think the most disappointing moment in the story for me is when Miles then proceeds to draw sketches of a suit, construct it with his unusually immense scientific understanding, and then swing heroically throughout the street. Be yourself, the game says. Insomniac differentiated Miles by making him a shadow and deleting half the flaws. So, this is where I prove my overarching point. Did you hate Miles in this game? Were you bored to tears by him? I'd bet the answer is no. Why? A tough question because you probably don't disagree with everything I just said. Where does your affinity come from? I think it comes from heroism, and now you can see why we gotta distinguish the physical from the symbolic. Miles Morales is hard to connect with, but Spider-Man isn't. One is a fairly dimensionless human being, but the other is an archetypal hero whose heroism this game feels scientifically molded to serve. A good thing, because at its deepest root, underneath the characters, villains, settings, and symbiotes, a good Spider-Man story is an elaborate excuse for the moral hero to prove himself in the most meaningful ways. Meaningful heroism inspires us, compels us, and connects us. Myth and Save the Cat writing techniques have shown that arguably since we began. So how does this game make Miles' heroism meaningful? Well, we are playing as Spider-Man. How does Peter pull it off? The answer is duality. Spider-Man and Peter Parker are two men with two worlds, and never can he be one without sacrifices to the other. When every choice is difficult, making the right one becomes meaningful, convincing, compelling heroism, a fact most emphatically captured at the end of Insomniac's 2018 epic. Through this vehicle, Spider-Man's heroism is proven powerfully, regularly, and relatably. This isn't a tool you give up lightly, but that's exactly what Insomniac have done. To pursue everything he wants in life, Miles sacrifices, I believe, a carton of milk, and then reveals his secret identity to just about everyone he lays eyes on. And yet, it remains true that this game is wired to serve Miles' heroism. How? They've given up their best tool. Oh, Insomniac have a different idea about how to use two souls, and it's something no medium could do better than video games. This ought to be interesting. What Sam Raimi achieved, and arguably what Insomniac didn't for Peter, is precisely what they desperately try to create here. A friendly neighborhood. Haley, Ganke, Rio, Finn, Aaron, Teo. In time, you'll care. And Christmas dinner's ready. Nothing like a little perspective to grant dimension to a world, to make it that much more believable and connected to the player. That is the function of Miles' home, and just as much the perspectives within it. Spider-Man's artwork, painted with heart, is the foreground to the new players in town. Roxxon Energy Corporation, overbearing. A striking symbolic contrast of these two souls that I'm going to ask you to remember. Miles finds himself concerned with his place in the community, and Finn suggests he goes to a restaurant or a barbershop to find people and connect. To shoot hoops, as she puts it. This struck me. Whether a city with such soul is more than just a dream in New York, I truly don't know, but here I believe it. And that means everything. The way video games deal with heroism might be the single deepest question you can ask of this medium, but all we need to know is how interactivity can be used to make heroism meaningful. Build strong connections, then threaten them strongly. That's a standard recipe for stakes. Video games just put you in control. Now your effort to save the world you've grown to love so much in whatever way it may be is heroism, and meaningful at that. A simple idea, perhaps best used by Ocarina of Time in 1998, but another example is in this very franchise, in the all-too-often overlooked jewel, Spider-Man Web of Shadows. Connections are built strongly with the city throughout the first act, so by the end, the state and fate of the city felt so much more tangible. You could call it duality, in a sense, peace to make war meaningful. Miles Morales has much the same idea, but it also has one additional dualistic layer. Contrast this soul directly against the corporate monster. Spider-Man doesn't need to spend time on someone's lost cat in a friendly neighborhood. He's Spider-Man, he could be taking on the gods, but he does, because he chose to. That perspective makes heroism meaningful in its own way. Perhaps the friendly neighborhood method serves video games in a way it never could where it was born. These are Insomniac's new dualities. Let's find out how far they go. Miles Morales' first post-intro mission is also the tutorial for the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man app. It's as simple as restoring a train service. These are the stakes, the world, its body, and most vitally, its soul. The app goes on to distribute side content for the same purpose. Insomniac have weaponized the insignificance of their side quests, with smaller jobs twice involving nothing but the save the cat trope. Intentionally, of course. Then an instance of petty Grand Theft Auto, and another, the ever-classic burning building. Low budget with a purpose. You could even say, being completely optional makes that heroism more meaningful, because you choose to do it. In the same way Miles chooses to use his power on the little guy. You don't have to, but you do. Despite their immense impact proportionally, the effect of strained resources is often made clear. There might be pigeon chases that are so short the dialogue will never have a chance to finish, or stalactites hanging onto the underside of a crane that prove I'm not the only one who can't break the ice. Half the firing angles work, half do nothing. Then, in the following QuickTime event, you break the pipe by clipping into it. The larger jobs, meanwhile, never suffer the same problem. With QA-tested but also entirely standard gameplay, their greatest strength is sequence, their request chain, and the point of that connection is, well, connection. The unknown criminal mastermind presents a lightly endearing sense of mystery, but the true benefit is having helped so many, so thoroughly and so believably. In fully committing yourself to Harlem, you bond to it, and it bonds to you. It turns out the real symbiote suit was literally the friends we made along the way. Connect, then threaten. It happens time and time again, all the way up to the ending. Spider-Cat is the personification of all of it. As a reward for bringing him back to Teo, you get yourself your very own sidekick. But Spider-Cat's more of a slapper. Haley, meanwhile, is our subtle love interest. Very subtle. The build-up to their romance is sometimes shooting Miles a happy look, but then she gives us her scarf, so let's hope Miles is better at laying pipe than destroying it. But both skills would do nicely. Insomniac are wise to capitalize on these connections by upping the threat. When the tension between Roxxon and the underground reaches boiling point, it's Miles' mistake that turns a skirmish into a disaster. But the set piece reminds us exactly who we're playing as. Awe is contrasted with Miles' visceral desperation. His inexperience caused this, and his inexperience might cost these people their lives too. You can feel that. Not least because Morales offers a greater degree of agency. You've got to use your full movement ability to get into place for the next QuickTime event. Yet more proof that Miles' greatest flaw is simply a lack of practice, instead of anything related to his character. But equally proof that one of those traits is heroism. At this point in the game, you'll have done few side quests, but the story does just as much heavy lifting in connecting us to these people. We want to save them, and we feel how hard it was to do. Symbolically, compelling. Physically, not so much. Having taken this beating, Miles retreats to his home, drained of motivation, and it's here we see one last perspective, and something familiar. For writers, be your own hero is misleading wisdom. It doesn't, or shouldn't, in my opinion, mean be yourself, which, due to the restrictive circumstance, results in doing the same thing as everyone else but with hip-hop instead of orchestra. It means this. Have you ever wondered why writers seem so obsessed with creating new Spider-Men and placing them in the very same universe? Because the message of Peter Parker is that anyone can be Spider-Man, and if that's what we hear, then it only makes sense for it to express itself. Miles may connect to us through Spider-Man's heroism, but also through his context. Spider-Man is an idol to us and to him. Miles is proof that idol is one anyone can live up to, that all it takes is to never give up. This is the perspective that Spider-Verse nailed too. It's what makes Miles special above just being a strong hero. Again, another symbolic merit. Miles as Spider-Man is why this scene that makes him look like Peter's physical shadow is overwhelmed by something inspiring. These words have been mocked relentlessly, so when I say them now, you know that I'm telling the truth. Spider-Man Miles Morales really makes you feel like Spider-Man. Whether it's the perspective of the small-time working class overshadowed by corporate dominance we become so thoroughly connected to through video games as a medium. Maybe it's the choice of going that extra mile for these people. Whether it's the perspective of heroism within us all, or just the perspective of swinging amongst a concrete jungle. How could you not feel like Spider-Man? The way he leaps off rooftops and flips backwards to face the camera before falling into a headfirst dive is just full of the exaggerated swagger of an inexperienced but adolescent Spider-Man. Every fluid motion is an expression of style, rebellion, and the utter joy of this most wonderful freedom. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about Miles' swagger is its respect for momentum. By contrast, this quality when lacking is responsible for the still present downwards web zip, where a meager tug is apparently supposed to cancel Spider-Man's fall speed. But when present, well, that's when the goosebumps come in. It's no trick. The tricks really do influence the swing animation thereafter believably. And yes, Miles really does do a little zip to initiate his spin. People have been using these animations to adapt into the Spider-Verse, but I have a different idea. Come on, Taz! Come on, Taz! Fuck. Miles Morales has a dimension Spider-Man PS4 never had. When we look down from above, now we think to the times we looked up from below. This game has its problems, but Insomniac have made their point. Miles is Spider-Man, and a compelling protagonist. Let's see if Spider-Man can carry the next 6 hours. Web swings, web runs, web heads, so many webs, so much to choose, but you only need one. A website. The world is chaotic, the internet is even more, so make it smaller. The loose ends of social media accounts, newsletters, blogs, and profiles can be funneled into one hub, one space, with unmatched brevity and ease. A website can be anything, things you might never have expected, like member-exclusive content or a store for your merchandise, and all without the need to hand over payment information until you're satisfied. So make it anything. Prove to yourself how easy web design can be. And when you're ready, get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain with code Whitelight at checkout. Of all the perspectives Miles Morales has to offer, perhaps the most spectacular is this one. The contrast of Insomniac's graphical technologies is never more apparent than it is on the PS5. Where a street lamp or a suit could be mistaken for reality, a face is firmly last gen, and Andrew Garfield here needs to get bitten by some radioactive anti-aliasing if he wants to outdo the PS3. From graphics, a contrasting quality extends into the art. Fuck the constabulary coming straight from the underground. Their purple lights and fabrics amongst silver metal plating makes me want to help. But perfectly in character for violent rebels, I worried they may step too far. Don't want to be too tacky in an otherwise believable setting, right? Programmable matter sells the plating, but Roxxon don't need any high-tech gizmo to be the ones who end up crossing the line. Forget the bomb squad, we need to call the Power Rangers. Someone's been playing too much Halo 5. Their buildings, though, are more Arasaka, but even in Night City they'd be conspicuous. Solid matte black with red RGB. Wonderful architecture if you make gaming laptops, but perhaps not for an Energy Corp in desperate need of good PR. Morales makes its visual oversteps, but its successes are defined by next gen. And playing as Spider-Man, precisely what next gen can do takes the spotlight. Loading times faster than the speed of sound aside, remember how in 2018 everyone had trouble believing Spider-Man PS4's New York looked that damn good? Yeah, seems almost funny from here, doesn't it? With 60 FPS and ray tracing, Miles Morales' New York looks, well, like New York. And if anything should give you perspective, it's that. Half the people watching this video are young enough to have missed out on half the shocks as graphical technology wowed in progress year after year after year. It felt like clockwork, and this isn't the end of the line, but you can see it from here. Here's another perspective for you. Tell me, is $10 the difference between a 20-hour campaign and an 8-hour one? Is $10 the difference between a new map and snow, entirely new systems, and a few new attacks? For Insomniac, $10 was the price of forgiveness for charging so much for what many argue is best defined as DLC. Miles Morales isn't DLC. but it isn't an expansion. It's not a remaster or a remake, and neither is it a sequel. In fact, our best comparison of all comes from Ubisoft. They're known for releasing lower-budget spin-offs to their flagship franchises, but where Assassin's Creed Rogue contributed River Valley in the North Atlantic Ocean, Blood Dragon and Freedom Cry were $20 and sold explicitly as DLC before releasing standalone. We gotta sympathize. Insomniac can't just take Spider-Man out of Manhattan, even if they wanted to, but then surely they should make up for that value somewhere else. Should they? Closest comparison is Far Cry New Dawn. Same setting, though longer, containing more systemic expansions and deeper atmospheric changes than Miles. It was also cheaper. For the sake of review, perhaps the most important perspective is this. How do we look at this game? And what should we expect? I'll be as clear as words will allow me to be. I think Insomniac's gameplay is excellent. I think this game is excellent. I also think I already paid for an overwhelming proportion of its excellence, and that we ought to talk about what that $10 really means. But mostly, I think there's no point in describing these systems as if they were new. Insomniac ought to practice what they preach. Be greater. To what degree is the core of this debate, but a pattern in the results seems clear. For the difference of $10, Miles makes systemic expansions that wow, while overlooking its system's problems, the same ones from 2 years ago, many that seemed not to be too far from fixing. But we'll start high. There's a consistent animation set for tricks depending on whether your dive is forward-facing or backwards-facing, and you'll also find consistency in the swing animation you get after each one. With a little memorization, Miles' exaggerated swagger goes from a meme to the primary source of what little depth the system has to get by on, and it really isn't much. Spider-Man can do anything a spider can, except go down, or diagonally with any speed, or crawl over tiny ledges. The truth is, Spider-Man can't even do everything himself can. Would you like to see one of the funniest videos on the internet? Wait, wrong one. As it turns out, what 2,000 hours looks like is about the same as what 2 hours looks like. This video popularized my initial claims about shallow movement better than I ever could, but the commenters didn't seem to fully realize that this happened not because the player was a muppet, but because there was no further from 2 hours worth of mastery that they could push it. No matter how much I enjoy this system, or how great it looks in evolution of web swinging videos, I hadn't touched this system in 2 years. But in 15 minutes, I swung with as much confidence, ability, and expressiveness as I did in 15 hours. The reason I still think it's good is simple. Their greatest strength is and always has been a dizzyingly visceral sense of momentum and speed as you skateboard through the most lovingly realized set of symbols yet. In the same way a platformer's end-user experience can vary dramatically based on game feel, Insomniac's movement may outclass a deeper iteration for many due to its sensory excellence. Game experience is never entirely reliant on game mechanics. It feels so utterly right for the time it needs to. But if you want Insomniac to reach their full potential, we need to be able to talk about the ways they're failing, where their predecessors succeeded, because I want them to make those comparison videos look like a bad joke in time. Perhaps it'd be too reductive to simply list off everything Insomniac's system can't do. He can't upward zip, downwards wall zip, slingshot, horizontal wall zip, break fall, pole swing, wall bounce, wall latch, or climb his web. But this only provides an outline. Insomniac could still have a deep system without any of that. The primary location of their problem is the swing. Two elements compose the problem. One is the restrictive nature of the boost, and the other is the restrictive nature of the arc. How do you boost in Spider-Man? Well, you just press, and we've reached our problem. You press, and then you're just gone? That's all? By contrast, a hold that doesn't force you to release the line allows you to control the speed of the swing at any time. You get precision, a powerful sense of momentum, but most of all, you can do the things Insomniac Spider-Man couldn't even dream of. The boost plays one part, the other is the arc. Accurate movement without zip to perch is nearly impossible, because your line 1 breaks whenever the game decides it does, and 2 will always break before you can go perpendicular or perform a full circle, whether it's horizontal or vertical. You can't even pause properly, not that it matters. A swing is a swing, and Spider-Man should be free. But Insomniac's interpretation chains the player to a recreation of a sine wave. Their only alternative is the point launched. Over the past 2 years, the hype and optics surrounding Insomniac's Spider-Man have made their paradigm the standard for what a good Spider-Man game should be. But this is a 20-year-old franchise, and now no one looks back anymore, for better or for worse. Once upon a time, Spider-Man games were sold on their free roam potential, the things you do long after the campaign ended. Once upon a time, crimes, pizza, and mastery made this Spider-Man game immortal. When you've 100%ed it, you gonna keep playing this game? Yeah? For how long? Even if you love this movement, can you tell me that I've got this one wrong? If you can't, then maybe you can tell me that I'm wrong to have expected any more. It's DLC, or an expansion, or a spin-off. It's a matter of perspective. But what we can be sure of is that it's $50, and that we cannot dismiss the argument that Insomniac had already set a concerning value for money precedent with The City That Never Sleeps. Remember that? I do. It deserved to be put to sleep. But there was a silver lining. If you look at Miles from the perspective of DLC, it must look like a masterpiece, and it did give us a damn good crime. Supply truck rescue is tougher than ever in Miles. Multiple fronts, one target. If you let anyone past for longer than 10 seconds, the driver dies. Situational awareness and positioning are challenged in unique ways that make you think. It's tough, but deep. Helicopter hack isn't. It's tough and spectacular. A simple use of the combat system and the challenge of pressing square on a transmitter is brought to life by this almost set-piece-like scene. Billboard hack is the same scaled down. It loses its flair. And continuing on the downward trend, we arrive at wars, robberies, and hijacks that merely exist as excuses to beat up some bad guys in a street. The combat's fun enough, so the crimes are almost never bad experiences. But it's been 2 years now. $50 and the best crime is reused? The rest have hardly anything to them? And most of all, the car chases. They still exist in exactly the state they were. Mind-numbing QuickTime events that go so far as to reuse the only 2 endlessly repeated animations we already had. You can see now the true heart of what I'm saying here. Car chases aren't just shallow, they're embarrassingly so. And we had to pay $50 to get them again? What perspective is there left to resort to? When you see how small a solution may be, can you say $50 wasn't enough money? Or that 2 years wasn't enough time? Miles Morales is a topic for the philosophers, but I've made my point that Insomniac's problems remain, that they feel overlooked. I'll continue to explain them as they are, but like for swinging, I'll also do the best I can to try and fix them. If crimes aren't up to standard, then what about the system they rely on? What about combat? Venom has you make choices between 3 potential moves for any given scenario tied to the same resource. If it represents the appreciated, spectacular, and somewhat deep addition, gadgets then are the place that needed grassroots change. I appreciate the creativity of the Holo Muppets, almost as much as I appreciate cutting the fluff from Peter's arsenal. But Morales retains the worst mistake of all. There is no quick select. Insomniac then decided to make this worse by removing Peter's quick swap between the 2 most recently used gadgets with a double tap of L1. I doubt most of you even knew that existed, but it did, and now it doesn't. Forget L1. This is L1000. This is an L so monstrous it presumes I'll want to interrupt the flow of a stupefyingly intense combat system with 2 weapon wheels every time I want to use a gadget. 2? Yeah, that's right. 2. It's literally double the problem you think it is, because every swap 2 begs a swap back. Remember, you're sacrificing the use and versatility of the web shooters whenever you want to try anything else. Is a Holo Muppet worth the faff? Another example. If a number of good but unremarkable enemy types are the addition, balance is the place that needed grassroots change. From the ground up, Insomniac's Spider combat relies on a simplistic single combo free flow system that it never wants you to use. Attacks here are weak, petty, lacking any free flow state where enemies are knocked down in sequence by a single blow. And as the player observes the contrast between these grounded strikes and everything else they have at their disposal, Insomniac tutorializes intended play, that being a tethered, unbroken sequence of abstract and equally more expressive Spider moves. Airstrike, swing kick, bowling pins, sticky webs, gadgets, environment, and now Venom. Many synergize with each other, and so the emergent gameplay potential boosts the list of possible combos to an incalculable number. The only limit is your own creativity, and the depth seems no more restricted. That was an extremely simplistic summary of Insomniac's combat system. What's interesting is how the depth changes depending on who you are. Depth is just making choices between a range of relevant balanced options. That's Chris Wagar's definition, and I think it's the best. But different people have different goals. The extrinsic player is motivated by advantage-disadvantage decision-making to win. The intrinsic player is motivated by looking as cool as possible. Intrinsically motivated players, in a sense, make their own balancing. So if looking cool is what you're after, then it's like I said. The only limit is your own skill and creativity. But if you want to win, here we arrive at precisely the focus of my original critique. For the more extrinsically motivated player, a minority I suspect for Spider-Man, combat is severely unbalanced. Only a Sith deals in absolutes. Motivation is a contextual spectrum, which is why everyone loses, however great the degree from this weakness. What does it look like? Let's find out. Don't be deluded by the game's insistence that air combat is desirable. Up here, it's true. You can abuse a single target to your heart's content. But if single target was your goal, you could have just knocked them on their asses with literally anything else and webbed them down. From here, matters only get worse. Spins are vastly better than the overhead for controlling the crowds you're always in, and you'll always have something to spin because you can use a webbed or venom-stunned enemy exactly as you can an environmental object. Next to a ledge, this situation inverts itself due to the sudden relative power of anything that can knock enemies off it. It hardly even matters that swing kicks are still outclassed by their directional leap-off in every conceivable way. Why? Because you can do this. Forget the swing kick, I caught this system in 4K. Cool, huh? Venom is the final nail in the coffin. For every function it serves, it outclasses its competition, which causes quite the imbalance by the time you'll nearly always have Venom. The complexity of fixing such interlinked imbalances is immensely intimidating. You might be tempted to tear half of it out and start from scratch. But there is a simpler solution. If we can't change the balance, maybe we can change the goal. What if you were extrinsically motivated to vary, combine, and synergize your attacks as much as possible? Not only would that nullify nearly all existing imbalances by making them low reward, it would also incentivize engaging with the system's depth consistently. Our solution is the one character action games have already found, a style meter. Devil May Cry is intrinsically motivated too, but that style meter gives looking cool an extrinsic incentive. If among the most revered combat systems in history weren't enough proof, then perhaps this very game is. Web swinging already has one. By rewarding trick combos with Venom that can be used in combat and movement to a limited degree, you incentivize pushing it in some way. You incentivize mastery. Looking cool can be deep. Most players already know this, because it's what they pursue for the lion's share of the runtime, but Miles is in balance now. Like its shallow movement is a knife that sinks deeper over time. 20 hours in, when combat finds it tougher than ever to wow, maybe you just want to win a little quicker. Maybe the game lets you, and maybe then you aren't so motivated to come back on the next day. Miles is great because Spider-Man PS4 was great, but it has the potential to be so much more, in precisely the same way it did 2 years before. From the right perspective, even Miles' story structure seems an imitation of its predecessor, and I find it hard to argue with that when it even manages to repeat its mistakes. Remember Silver Sable? You could call Spider-Man PS4 and its DLC the Mopping Up Sable's Incompetent Dictatorship anthology, though no matter how many cities she occupied and civilians placed in detention camps, and attempts to assassinate Spider-Man and displays of inconceivable muppetry, she was somehow a redeemable villain, as if the streets are safer with E-Girl Stalin on them than Electro or Vulture. But perhaps the most frustrating thing of all was watching this happen while Spider-Man got his ass mercilessly beat again and again through brawn instead of brains. He'll get drop-kicked at gunpoint 3 times in a row, but 5 minutes ago he held out against the entire Sinister Six for nearly a minute, and 5 minutes later he'll be back to fighting small armies. Why am I telling you this? So you can easily project the situation onto Miles, and so you know that it's happened before. Miles can smash Rhino's head in and pull a fucking bridge back together, but he can't move a ton or so of concrete blocking a doorway. He can canonically beat entire armies of underground goons using underground weapons, but then gets utterly demolished time and time again by just one. Miles can dodge firearms and disarm their bearers with ease, but when Roxxon get their rocks off by threatening him in a cutscene, he fears for his life. Sound familiar? An excuse, it seems, to introduce camouflage. Perhaps stealth serves my point best of all. And to understand camouflage, first we'll need to understand detective mode. It's an accelerant, a believably contextualized way for Batman, Ezio, or Talion to skip or speed up the information phase of a stealth encounter and move swiftly on to planning and execution, where the fun stuff lies. Spider-Man uses the same idea, but it's not satisfied with highlights. Insomniac accelerates the accelerant, instead giving you debug mode on enemy AI, and so removing all tension or decision-making from execution. Tension requires risk. Risk requires not being told exactly what a safe takedown is. Stealth often becomes no more complex than waiting for a prompt to go grey and hitting square, most often in miles, thanks to our new wall and ceiling takedowns. This problem is something else Insomniac seem deeply aware of. Every move they've made since 2018 can simply be described as one more layer of complexity. Maybe it's Black Cat's teamwork, maybe it's Screwball's photobombs, or maybe it's in Miles Morales' opening hours, where it seeks additional depth by prioritizing distraction. A great many goons, a great many sightlines, but just as many objects to draw their attention with. You might have gone all of PS4 without using this once. Miles rectifies its mistake, but not for long. Unfortunately, Insomniac have once again tripped over their own shoelaces with this system. Remote Mine seems great on paper until you realize exactly two guys will always come waltzing right on over, no matter what you do, essentially making it a couple free insta-kills, which you might in fact realize twice when you try attaching it directly to a goon and learn that it is, quite literally, a free insta-kill. Cool. Not only do we still have mindless press to delete tools, but you're also encouraged to use them. At least with the trip mine you had to aim for the guy's scrotum. One more layer of complexity becomes one more overpowered ability that in practice disincentivizes complexity. Why look for distraction objects and risk sneaking in for the kill when I can just delete him there and then? In large encounters, this is precisely the same effect of camouflage. Forget sightlines, walk up, hit square, walk away. Of course, there's rarely a definite reason to do that given how easy it is to do anything else, but Insomniac see a power problem, which is why you can't stealth kill anyone else if they see their mates get flattened by an invisible Shelob. In large encounters, of course, that just means zip away and work on someone else, but in smaller encounters, it does its job. It completely disincentivizes camouflage as a method of attack. Why delay yourself when you could use any other method of distracting their sight? One of those insta-kills, for example, or a bog-standard distraction. If not an offensive tool, then what? You see, in this scenario, the use of camo is essentially a press button to delete the rest of the risk ability. If the arena forces it or you're feeling like a wild card, you might end up deciding to creep up behind someone on foot. In that case, there was a chance you'd be spotted. Not anymore. It's a get-out-of-jail-free card. That results in three things. It makes stealth easier, it makes it more likely you'll stay in stealth for a higher proportion of the encounter, and lastly, it results in not being useful enough to justify Insomniac's focus on it. Stealth was already easy without it. Most people get spotted because they run out of patience. And yet, dedicated to this lone ability is a third of the skill tree and a new enemy type, an infrared detector, as if it were a real wrench in the works to compromise the safety of this ability you must be so reliant on. Right? A third of the skill tree for something this shallow. Why? Perhaps it's because Insomniac understand the nature of their stealth system in the end-user experience. It's an endearing prelude to the meat of an encounter, but it's never the encounter itself. Stealth is almost always just the starter. Camouflage is shallow, but it extends that starter. Were that the goal, it succeeds. It makes it so much less likely combat ever initiates. But surely there were much bigger problems than time. It's fundamentally weak. I have a theory that there were bigger problems, vastly bigger. Have you ever wondered why Insomniac decided against the industry standard detective mode and went with debug mode instead? I think it's because if you had to fox those sightlines out with your wits alone, you'd realize how utterly busted they are. The game whimsically flips the prompt from safe to danger in total absence of any logical changes to account for it. This guy is apparently safe, And yet, this guy is dangerous. Equally inconsistent is the consequence. Sometimes making a move on Danny Danger gets you spotted. Other times, nothing at all. On the docks here, do you see anything that might prove the game's warning right? It doesn't matter. Even according to the system's most reliable information, the meaning and consequence of danger changes with the weather. So imagine what it'd be like without the system's most reliable information. We are making the assumption that danger is meant to be reliable information, that it works as a definite statement of detection states like safe does. Could be it's working exactly as intended. But what else could explain Insomniac's choice to abandon industry standards and use an information system that inherently nullifies the tension of stealth gameplay? In comparison to its contemporaries, Insomniac lacks meaningful enemy variety, escalation mechanics, interesting level design, and gadgets or environmental objects that exist as anything more than trivial insta-kills. But given the effect of what, when it works, is equivalent to a test that tells you the answers, I seriously worry their problems might run deeper than we think. As for camouflage, it could disappear and I wouldn't even notice. Miles Morales leaves me tangled in perspectives, because as a sequel, it would be unacceptable, and as a DLC, it'd be fine. But I'm supposed to believe $10 in 2 years is the difference between those two things. What should I expect? We're left with an excellent video game, so much of whose excellence I've already paid for, and whose ascension is blocked by the smaller systemic changes. We're left with a title in limbo, but one thing's for sure. $10 is also meant to justify its length, and the clock is ticking.
Can I just make it absolutely clear now that I'm only here because the producer said I had to be? I don't like snow. I hate being cold. I hate outdoor pursuits. I hate the idea that I've got to push my body to find the limit. I can't stand this stupid clothing that makes this rustling noise when you move all the time. And I hate the zips and the toggles and all the pockets and that. And I hate your stupid truck.
Miles cuts the fat from its predecessor, most likely because it had to, but I wished it was because it learned its lesson. Minigames? Why? And why really is the question. They weren't deep, interesting, or endearing in any way. There's no one alive who felt excitement at the prospect of Fisher-Price circuitry, which means there's just as many no ones to be sad at their departure. I can hardly say there are no Miles missions this time around, because that wouldn't strictly be true. But there's sure as hell nothing from MJ. It's a fair point that these were precisely how Insomniac used to deliver their so-valuable perspective. That benefit, however, was overwhelmed by the detriments of the gameplay, which really made me feel like uninstalling. In Spider-Man Miles Morales, you play as Spider-Man, but that didn't stop Insomniac from desperately trying to fill the hole they left. Rarely, but frequently enough, you'll be forced into tetherweb puzzles. Think Just Cause, but without the justice, because the depth ranges all the way from a 4-year-old's connect the dots exercise to whirling around a charity check-size fidget spinner so you can then perform the same connect the dots exercise. I'm left with the same question. Why? Insomniac want puzzles, but they've spent 40 hours of video game so far, tripping over themselves to design just a single good one. I think the time has come to bust out that age-old Malcolm Tuckerism. Sort it or abort it. For other elements of archaic design, like the flavor of side fluff, Insomniac used different methods to trim the fat. Only one type of reward this time, a standardized activity token to spend on buying even more pointless insta-kills, and a frankly immeasurable amount of drip. Suit choice is as subjective as it gets, but it really made me feel like I had the exaggerated swagger of a black suit. And as for the content itself, the strategy is simple. Cut the crappiest half of the content and add a hint of spice to everything left. Underground hideouts are quite literally reskinned Fisk hideouts, but there's an extra layer to these extra layers. After each one, disabling the transmitter takes you deeper, and there you might be ambushed by some boxes, creating a puzzle, or some fucking weeping angels, creating about 63 gigabytes on my SSD. Ultimately, a questionably shallow display for the asking price, but all the right cuts were made in all the right places. Roxxon's hideouts play the same card, but instead of a fright, you get an MP3 from Troy Baker. It hardly seems appropriate to call Simon Krieger by his real name, because he doesn't deserve it.
Roxxon Rockstars!
Evil businessmen are often compelling, but Krieger is a stereotype, and most importantly, only a stereotype. Charismatic side, business casual, outbursts of manic anger in private. Even Simon Krieger's greatest asset is generic, Troy Baker, who once again delivers a fantastic performance. Backstory absent, motive standard, not even a single deviation. The stereotype is pure, and so purely dull. With Bill Zucker-Bezos comes further numb ideas. Titanfall 2 proved that high-tech MacGuffins can compel. The Ark had alien, supernatural, and awe-striking qualities that made its nature both deeply mysterious and genuinely intimidating. Miles has nothing. You will forget this substance's name. If you played it, do you remember it now? Nandrogen? Nandrogen, that was it. No, it wasn't. It was Nuform. Nuform is a new form of the even standard for Spider-Man trope, promising but dangerous technology that when used in an arrogant disregard of public safety goes terribly wrong, and if written well, teaches us a simple incarnation of the Icarus myth. Difference is, where Dr. Octavius and Kurt Connors were first and foremost driven by a reach for the stars, Steve Cromwell is driven by getting a fat loaf of that bread. Believable, appropriate, but it leaves us, even without a mythical base, to support rocks on. Finn, short for Muffin, thankfully overshadows Samuel and takes center stage as the villain. It's a problem that our motivations are conveyed in a scene that can only make you sigh. An MP4 file just waiting to be played. Secret footage of the aforementioned technology going wrong, killing someone in the end. It was her brother, Rick, and with only the aid of a brief, uneventful cutscene, his death meant nothing to me. Her loss, her motivation doesn't make the player feel a damn thing. It could have, and now I'm gonna prove it. With Finn, Miles Morales makes a habit of wasting its own borrowed time. In 15 minutes flat, the postcard hunt, I think, summarizes that. And perhaps Insomniac 2 in some exaggerated sense. Take a deep concept like riddles and make the answers obvious to the point there may as well have been no context at all. But then, somehow, with characters nearly just as one-dimensional, manage to make me cry. Through the concoction of loss, tragedy, memory, heart, and heroism, I grew to love Miles' family through emotional empathy alone, even though I hardly knew them. A dead father speaks to his son from beyond the grave, not knowing what fate awaited him, and so making promises he could never keep, about what's important in life, and how proud he is of his son. It is also, I think, reflective of my overarching point, how this game manages time. In 8 audio logs and a 20-second flashback, they achieved a tier, while giving Miles and Muffin backstory that would unquestionably have enhanced the narrative. Yet, this was hidden from me. You won't even know it exists unless you go back home under the icon of a side mission. This, in a game running out of time. Our next exhibit is literally an exhibition, and it achieves the same conflicted effect in a completely different way. The science fair that comes moments before the end. It's heartwarming, beautiful, and completely fucking stupid. But that didn't diminish the soul of the scene. What did was the anime approach. Miles gets violated by an the other anime approach. It comes all too late. There was an entire game just before that begged for the help this scene could have provided. Those touching moments and memories. Nothing else. In the 10 minutes it takes, we don't learn anything. But connection in a time like this is more valuable than gold. I want to care for Finn's fate. But thinking even earlier, I also want to care for why Finn changed like she did. We aren't shown what they used to be until now. We're only told. With wise placement, this flashback would create a mystery. What happened? A question we, as the player, hardly care to ask before we've already found out. Not yearning for her redemption, Finn frustrates rather than compels as her character exploits contrived power differences and routinely resists all calls to reason out of something the player can't help but see as sheer stubbornness.
No! The reactor! Krieger changed the specs. You're not just gonna destroy Roxxon Plaza. You're gonna vaporize all of Harlem.
I'm not gonna let you lie to me again!
First time, Miles' secret identity made them even, unless I'm supposed to believe not telling anyone she was moonlighting as Osama Bin Laden isn't a similar transgression. The second lie simply wasn't. Fair, of course, to suspect Miles of setting her up, when he's the one who came within inches of being beaten to death. Twice, if logic can be tossed aside, because her guilt has made her psychologically dependent on her vendetta against Roxxon. That can work, so long as that vendetta is more to me than a few minutes of assorted dull cliches. I needed to want her revenge. I don't. You have to try to empathize with her motivation. You have to try to make her fulfill her function as a compelling villain. Finn Mason doesn't ruin this game, but she comes far too close for comfort. I've already paid for most of Miles' excellence. I didn't expect to receive the same mistakes too. Managing the monster of time. That was Insomniac's arch-nemesis. But in this war, there was a final battle. The stuff I haven't already paid for includes most vitally the friendly neighborhood. On one side of the coin is the FSNM app side activities. To make such low-budget standard encounters something so meaningful is a testament to how great this writer's room can be. And they haven't even concluded yet. They will. On the other side of the coin is Uncle Aaron. He's the star of the first FSNM job, and alongside Finn, the second moral ambiguity. His presence in the story seems to have a satisfying arc, but no one is free of the curse of time. This is how Miles reacts to Aaron revealing himself as the Prowler.
What's so funny?
Damn, Miles. We're a skinny-ass kid. You hit hard.
Uncle Aaron? You're the Prowler? My dad had a foul on you.
I know. And I bet you got a lot of questions right now. But we need to get out of here. You picked the wrong place to break into.
I'm not leaving till I find what I came for.
Listen.
Brosif, he just dropped a hydrogen bomb on you, and you're acting like he said you posted cringe. Then again, towards the end, in perhaps the most embarrassing example so far, Prowler's heartfelt parental wisdom for Miles is the necessity of a healthy work-life balance.
You still making beats?
Okay, I'll bite.
There you go.
Alright, thanks, Unc.
What do you mean, thanks, Uncle Aaron? He hasn't even had a chance to sit down yet. In 30 seconds, apparently, Miles has learned his lesson, cleared his head, and knows exactly what to do next. Call me Gwen Stacy, because I'm about to die of whiplash. Too abrupt for meaningful pacing in the context of the surrounding missions? Too thin for meaningful characterization? What was the point? Shameless introduction of another hollow side activity, and a minor, predictable revelation that could have been done any other way. In times like this, Miles can't help but make me think it's making sacrifices. Yet, it simultaneously hides things the story would have benefited from, and all too often wastes what moments we've got. We're left with a frustrating villain to complement one whose name you will forget as fast as his equally bland MacGuffin. As for Prowler, time leaves him wounded, but miles from destroyed. Time to finish things.
Sorry about this, nephew.
At its deepest root, underneath the characters, villains, settings, and symbiotes, a Spider-Man story is an elaborate excuse for the archetypal moral hero to prove himself in the most meaningful ways. Miles Morales has his symbolic confirmation as Spider-Man, but how far can he push the moral hero archetype? How much can he inspire? Prowler's attack on Spider-Man is a perfectly believable climax of their twin plot threads. A survivor first and foremost, Uncle Aaron doesn't care for the method. No one else from his family can die trying to be the hero. Aaron's case is believable, but most of all, convincing in a relatable sense. He embodies the reason most people are not heroes: rationality and self-preservation. Why get yourself killed trying to be righteous? Would you let your family die for a chance at some greater good? Insomniac's Prowler is the perspective they need to once again nail that symbol. When Miles defeats the personification of the most compelling argument against him, he might not have proved Prowler wrong, but he has proved the heart of his heroism meaningfully. Prowler's fight is yet another victory of meaning over matter. The music is wonderful, the cloaking and hologram moveset fits Prowler's ability perfectly, and the dialogue is emotionally engaging.
Then I'll do what I have to. Keep you safe.
This is a compelling fight as an interactive expression of the story. As a set of game mechanics, the cloak will throw off your dodge instincts for about 15 seconds, and every other trick he's got is either too insignificant or should be something you're intimately familiar with already. A quick rush on the player, venom debuffs, grenades. It's hard for Prowler to even use them when Miles can keep him stuck in a combo for so long. Any halfway smart sequence of attacks is tantamount to bullying. If I were him, I'd quit the job too. A short while before this was a fight alongside Finn against Rhino. A short while after comes the final confrontation with Finn, atop Roxxon Tower. For a sense of powerful climax, this game concentrates its boss fights towards the end. But what did the distinct lack of creativity serve? Finn's contribution to Rhino's battle is superficial, otherwise these are 1v1, Spider-Man versus a similarly powerful humanoid in a tech suit. By contrast to a gallery of fight mechanics that incorporated the presence of multiple bosses and used superpowers in meaningful ways, Miles' best showing mechanically is Rhino, simply for the fact that there's an interesting, unique, boss-like quality to his encounter. Drive him into the tanks, that's novel. Throw reactors at his armor, that becomes an exotic test of positioning because you need to be far enough away from everyone to complete the throw without interruption. Miles Morales shows little interest in making a boss fight interesting, instead choosing to prioritize spectacle and emotion. But we see the benefits of that focus, as much as we see the drawbacks. Tinkerer puts the Finn in Finale. Let's test her mettle. Precisely what made Sam Raimi's fights feel super can be found here. Tangibility. The arena, if the deep red color wasn't enough, is lined with 6 fully destructible pillars and 4 smashable windows you can hurl Finn straight through. The fight earns the same super sensation through mechanics. Finn is equipped with an aggressive AI to put her attack repertoire to use. A ground pound, wide, rapid sword strokes, a cannon, a turret alongside the cannon to throw off your transfer into melee range, and finally, Donkey gets his wish. Big wheel. It's a challenging test of timing, but likely it'll be her defenses that throw you off the most. Swing kicks, yanks, uppercuts. She can turn your attacks on their head. There's a back and forth rhythm. Whoever has the upper hand is up in the air, mostly literally, and it's through this that the fight mechanics win that super sensation.
Don't make me kill you! You can't win! Why do you keep fighting?
Because I'm Spider-Man.
It's in Phase 3 that Insomniac's use of perspective reaches its brilliant climax. As you play out your titanic clash, Krieger chimes in, utterly indifferent. Who lives, who dies, who wins, who loses, he doesn't care. They have the money, they've got the lawyers, and that unmoved dismissal, juxtaposed upon this infernal battle, is precisely the same symbolic contrast as the one from Rio's window. An overbearing, inorganic monster makes you at your largest feel like an ant. It can't help but affect you, and so it perfectly communicates an understanding of Finn in a way the player can truly internalize. It's genius through perspective, and it came seconds before the end.
This shouldn't be happening.
I can stop it.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
The hero is the one who never gives up, even on Finn. Now the symbol of Spider-Man's fate awaits him, to sacrifice everything for what's right, even your life. For Finn, this was the symbol that made her what she is now. Miles stands where Rick stood. He's willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. The hero inspires heroism, and just for a moment, Finn becomes Spider-Man.
What are you... I can't.
It's okay.
I can't.
Just let go. Let go.
Was that a Zack Snyder tier Jesus reference? I can't tell, but Insomniac are speaking in symbols, and now they're gonna prove it to you again. The lives Miles saved are the same lives he helped in all those tiny side missions before.
No, please.
Is everyone... okay?
We're safe. All of us.
The ending didn't need to convince us Miles Morales was Spider-Man, so instead it gave the character his ultimate symbolic victory. This type of ritualistic acceptance is deeply linked to the type of heroism Spider-Man's stories and mythos is so perfectly constructed to tell. Miles abandons one type of duality, but uses video games as a medium to accentuate a new one. Despite their differences, our bond to Harlem makes this moment as powerful here as it was in Spider-Man 2, where first we were convinced Miles was Spider-Man. Now we see the full effect of that truth, and so double its confirmation. Miles does what Peter Parker did for him. He inspires the audience. He inspires the Prowler. He inspires his people, but most of all, he inspires Finn. What could say more than getting through to her? This game is tangled in a web of its own making. Soul, time, its very nature as a product. As Miles swings through the trees of a concrete jungle, the story will either follow in an inconspicuous waddle or teleport from start to finish with no flesh at all. It suffers blow after blow in its ambivalence. But one thing is always clear. Insomniac have created one of the best iterations of the Spider-Man myth in living memory. It understands heroism and Spider-Man's incarnation of the moral hero so excellently that with a failure of a villain amongst the ruins of the dullest plot device in history and a one-dimensional protagonist, it touches so deeply that on that night, I was ready to call it my game of the year. Spider-Man Miles Morales isn't a subtitle. It's a statement of fact. He earns the right to stand proudly alongside Peter Parker, and he does. An incarnation of the message that we can all be heroes. We never have to give up. We can all be Spider-Man. Special thanks go out to G. Series, Alan Song, Alex Graft, Austin Novosel, Bishop Nelson, Chase Baker, Chino, Duncan Austin, Effectfully, Elijah Hayden, Fernando Marquez, Gurneal, Ino Lucky, JD, John Lemley, Caleb Doss, Canra Hatake, Lex Williams, L. Hudson, Linus Newman, Mr. T with some T, Newts, William Bosseler, Warthol, Fabian Flack, Soren66, Dubstep Gutterfan 92, Bloth, Darren Chambers, Abby, Adam Abuela, Addison Martin, AJ Sharp, Andre Baltuta, Angelic Padawan, Attila, Blue Eyes White Idiot, Bozian22, Brandon Harris, Brendan McDonald, Cale Quinn, Chance Tucker, Christy, Christopher Richardson, Combat Wombat, Cyril Bensimon, Dan Walker, Dave W, David Gibson, Devontae Williams, Dominic Jaworski, Drop ZZ, Eli Weaver, George Fitzboodle, Gwyneth, Hamish, Hypocrite, Holy Shift, Hussar Master, I pay my camgirl so why don't you? Jake Dunnigan, Jonathan Tunnell, Joseph, Josephius, Joshua W. Schreiner, Jiris Purins, Justin, Caleb Bryan, Laser Crystal, Leon Cuttendall, Lucas 04, Lubomir Mitkov, Mataphobia, Michael Gamble, Nathan, Navy Husky, Nines, Norm Ambroise, Cy, Rackenhock, Shad Stout, Shade, Tax 1 Cab, That's for the Birds, The Last Great Opium Den, Trending Tech, Uriel Rahip, Vertigious, Vladimir Obakov, ZZZZZZ2468, DJ, Glorious Sexy Beast, Joe Simmons, John Fenler, and Jubba Jeroni.